beards, cutoffs, tattoos, a little bit of an edge. There's an American strength coach right there. I mean,
no, what else do we need? CT, let's do it.
All right, here we go, everybody. Welcome back. Episode 6, Cutoffs and Coffee. We have our cutoffs on. We have our coffee. Ladies and gentlemen, we are so excited today. Our guest joining us is Nick Winkelman, the head of athletic performance for the Irish Rugby Football Union. Also has received very high praise from coaches Eric Cressy, Mike Boyle, Martin Rooney, just to name a few, on his new book, The Language of Coaching, which is the #1 new release in weight training on Amazon. This thing is so popular, it is hard to get your hands on, but continue to order them and you will get your book. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Coach Nick Winkelman. Nick, thank you so much for joining us today at Cutoffs and Coffee.
awesome, man. I love cutoffs and I love coffee. So when you guys invited me on, I said, perfect. I just need you. I'm in the afternoon, so I'm getting that extra cup of coffee in right now.
Yeah, there you go. I was saying to James before we started too, I think to become an elite strength coach, I think you have to have hand tattoos. And so you and myself have them. So I think Coach James is next. Nick, tell us what you got on, what you got going on. You said you're in the afternoon. You're over there overseas. Where are you? What do you have going on right now?
Yeah, so I've been living in Dublin, Ireland now for, just over 4 years. My role out here is head of athletic performance and science, these fancy titles for Irish Rugby. And basically that just means I get to work with a lot of great people across our national teams, which is men's and women's 15s and 7s are the versions of the game, as well as we have 4 professional teams, kind of like 4 NFL teams that feed into that national team. And so for me, I think like everybody right now in this COVID scenario, I'm spending all day long on Microsoft Teams and Zoom. And say what we will about the meeting fatigue, it's allowed for some unbelievable relationship building, even with people that we already have great relationships with. And I'm always curious, we're always talking about the good that's going to come out of this unfortunate situation. And I think, funny enough, in the spirit of what we'll be talking about today, the quality of communication and relationship building for me has come to the fore. So literally before getting on here is what I've been doing all day and most days right now when I'm not taking the kids outside and running them at the park.
That reminds me of something CT said way when this quarantine first started, is that, if we could just reverse this and think that this is happening for us, not to us, it will really change the perspective of what we're able to accomplish in this time, which is very unique. Yeah. So I think, some of these conversations we're able to have, with you and with some other coaches, this is a unique time that's really expanded our ability to conversate and talk to the people we've looked up to, for the last 4 or 5 years of training. So, hopefully that, a lot of people outside of just our small unit are being able to take advantage and spin this to be positive.
Totally. I mean, it is in the world of human connection, this is a watershed moment because more people are connecting and connecting deeply. I'm seeing Zoom calls that go really well, and it's not a one-off. People are actually jumping on again the next week, or people are breaking off and having their own conversation. So, I mean, this is like supercharged networking. But I think because of the situation we're in, it's not networking for networking's sake. We're all going through this common level of pain and discomfort and uncertainty, and that's bringing us together. I think there's a sincerity in the words of Brené Brown in that vulnerability, and now the opportunity to share that with others. It's just creating this condition for really deep relationship building with people that likely you never would have well beyond your circle because of things like this.
So that'll kind of lead us into our first question. When we're talking, when we're having these great conversations, everybody has a slightly different background. You had a couple of incredible experiences, starting way back, when you were still in the States. And through that, and through your experiences, was there any time where you had to make a paradigm shift or there was like an eye-opening moment where you're just like, aha, I might need to shift how I'm operating and coaching?
It's really interesting. I've been asked that question before, and I don't know if there was ever one moment where I got smacked in the face And I said, man, I've been doing this horribly wrong. I think that's probably been drip fed throughout my entire career. And I think part of the reason is early on, I had mentors who came from strength conditioning, personal training, and athletic therapy. And that wasn't by design. It wasn't like I had, some superior idea to go out and find people in those different domains. But I was just very fortunate that Rudy was my strength coach in high school. And as good as he was at strength and conditioning, he was phenomenal at focusing on the person inside of the player. So early on, I saw a strength coach who I looked up to who was person-centered. And so I think that as a habit, as a style of coaching was embedded in me early. And I think ultimately I didn't have that phase where I was this autocratic coach because I had never experienced that. Or if I had, I was able to contrast it with Rudy and then move forward. I worked with this personal trainer named JC, who was this wizard of communication. Like he could just slice and dice people's minds with cues. And he actually worked in bodybuilding, which within bodybuilding, to get very precise activation and very specific range of motion to build out the aesthetic of the body, he had learned to train his communication to do that. And then on top of all of that, making sure that I wasn't overly meathead was my mentor, Guido Van Rijsegem, who was a sports medicine degree in athletic training and an advanced MSc degree, a master's, worked in professional baseball for over 15 years. And I found him working in the corner, at the gym at Oregon State University because, you know what, he was a family first guy. He's like, I've done that. Now I want to ease up on my life. But he was a diamond in the rough. So now I got this guy teaching me all about range of motion and movement and anatomy. And so with that education, they were pointing me, let's say, in the direction that I probably would have found on my own in 5 to 10 years' time when I was just getting into the game. The biggest probably moment for me, watershed moment for me, was that how I was on the floor and how I was off the floor needed to be slightly different. And so I've shared this story before. When I was working at Exos as an intern, it was Athletes Performance at the time. I was an intern like so many people are interns, and I was gung-ho to do the best job possible. But it became apparent early on that I was so eager that I was coming across as cocky, overconfident, and a know-it-all. Which if you had said that to my wife or my mom, they're like, yeah?
Yeah.
That sounds about right. And so I think the watershed moment for me was this. My mentor at the time, Luke Richardson, sat me down and he's like, are you doing all your responsibilities? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, well, you're obviously not doing enough because you have far too much time to talk. And he's like, what you got to understand right now is you've got to earn the right to share what you know. And while you think you know something, this has been your first opportunity to actually apply it as a practitioner. And what you need to realize as a strength coach, it's one thing to know something. It's another thing to know how to apply it and how to nudge it and how to change it. And so Luke did me a solid by checking me very early on. He's like, be seen, not heard. Soak up everything around you. And there will come a point where people will ask you for your input, will ask you to step in. And when you're asked, man, give it your all. But in the meantime, be patient. And I found that while it doesn't have to do with a paradigm shift in training methodology, was a paradigm shift in me as a person. And I think he supercharged the importance of humility, asking questions, seeking to understand, trying not to be the smartest guy in the room, but actually the opposite, and surrounding yourself by people that will challenge you and be better than you. But at the same time, when you got the opportunity, when you are asked to step up, man, hold nothing back and give it your all. And so I'd probably say that would be ultimately my moment that gets at your question.
Nick, do you remember some of those? Do you remember those specific conversations that you had with athletes when you were? Yeah, and how did those go after you were kind of checked? Were you nervous? Were you kind of worried about those conversations, or were you prepared and ready for when that time came?
Yeah, I think after I got checked, mind you, I was an intern, so I wasn't necessarily the front man at that time. I was the assistant. I was in the supporting role, and what it allowed me to do is take a step back in my own head and say, listen, I don't need to try to show these people everything I know. If I show up every day, I do what's asked of me, and I go the extra mile silently, and I make, in this case, Luke's job easier, I will inevitably earn the right. And so I think through that process, it was just natural. Was I nervous? Yeah, sure I was. After that, I started to becoming hypercritical of my communication, what I said, when I said it, how much I said, my demeanor, my energy, not trying to be the guy in the front of the room always raising his hand. And I started to study in myself human behavior. And human behavior and human interaction is a complex thing. And so when I look back at these moments, I think they worked for me because somewhere inside of my DNA, I've always had an interest in communication, in interaction, and connection. And I value now in my relationship with others what I valued in Luke. And that is the best thing I can be for someone, whether it's an athlete, an employee, a friend, is sincerity and honesty with empathy. It doesn't mean we have to be harsh. A lot of people, when they hear feedback, they hear something negative. Ooh, ouch! I don't want to go. I don't want to step into that. But for me, there's an art form in being able to provide empathetic feedback, where I tell you something harsh, but I put it in a way where you feel like you were given a gift. Now, I can't say I always receive feedback from others that way, but I've learned the value of trying to pay that forward in that way.
I was going to say that's got to be a hard conversation, one, to have as a coach talking to an intern, but then two, as an intern, being able to receive that information, download it, and process it in a way that lets you excel now, as opposed to taking it, but well, you know, I could just discount everything this guy says and move on and not take anything from it. How old were you when you had that conversation? Because that's a pretty mature way to respond, you know, talking about.
I was 21. I was 21. And so, well, to be honest with you, nothing he said surprised me. And what I realized, it was the case of mislabeling. I've had the intern that truly was out to make a statement, that just wanted to show everybody what they knew. And they weren't doing it in the spirit of connection and growth. They were doing it to prop themselves up. Okay, I have met those interns. I've also met the interns who were like me. And instantly I laugh and I reflect back to the conversation with Luke. And I'm like, I understand why I was getting under this guy's skin. But I equally now have so much more respect for the patience and the bravery to just come out and shoot me straight and do it in a way that was productive to help me be better. And that most certainly informed conversations I had with future interns. But for me, to be honest with you, I didn't give you the backstory. Coming into that internship, I'd been preparing for it for 3 years. See, I met Guido van Rijsselgem, that ATC mentor of mine, when I was a year 2 in college. And I'll never forget, he opens up the drawer in his office and he pulls out a trifold and puts it in front of me. And it was the very first trifold that Athletes Performance had ever made. And it had Verstegen with his flat top, looking like the most serious military man from Eastern Bloc Russia. And he's like, listen, if you want to be the best, this man is going to change the game. He is taking high performance on the road. He's created a private facility with the best of the best in athletes and services and equipment facilities, you name it. If you want to be the best, that's the guy you need to work with. And so you understand, 3 years, literally, I committed day in, day out to getting my degree and working with this guy, Guido, alongside my degree to be ready to go. Internships in pro ball, internships in collegiate baseball, personal training all the way through. I was a man on fire. And so now I'm finally there. I'm 2 feet in the door. I'm 2 weeks in. And I'm getting a conversation that was the antithesis of what I was trying to do. These guys are saying, you're not playing well downstairs. You're coming across as overzealous, self-confident, inflated ego. If you don't check yourself, this is going to be a long internship process. And so in that moment, my first reaction was one of absolute fear, pain, anger, negative. But that lasted for about 30 seconds, which is uncharacteristic of me. I'm a guy that holds things in. And I said, if I don't check myself on this, it doesn't matter what I think and what I feel. That's perception. And if I want to shift perception to achieve the reality I'm looking for, I'm the one that's got to change, not them. And in that 6-month period, I transformed so that guy, Luke, came up to me at the end. And if you know him, you'll understand why he said it this way. He kind of laughed, put his hand on my shoulder, said, man, I never thought you would take me as seriously as you did. Credit to you. You have turned this thing around. And, that was validation. The other validation was the fact that I was offered a job 2 weeks before the whole thing was over. And so I think about now where we're at with the situation we find ourselves, and just generally, I'm a big believer in developing others. The ultimate reality that everyone's in right now, especially as we get out of this, is there are less jobs than there are people that want them in strength conditioning. And hopefully, if my story conveys anything, you've got to want it. You can have the skill, you can have the ability, the knowledge, but you have got to want it, and you have got to seek out the pain of the reality that you do not know about yourself. Because only when that becomes visible will you be able to achieve what my mentor called the ability to be the chameleon, to be whatever is needed in that environment whenever it's needed. And that means you're not sincere and authentic, but that means you know how to adapt tone of voice, language, body language, to be in service of that moment and that person in it. And that, I feel, is the trait of any great leader, let alone a great coach. And I look up to Luke Richardson so much for what he taught me about that.
You could have gone after that conversation two completely different ways, right? Yes. And I'm sure that you've had that thought multiple times, and it's so great to see where you've gotten to now, because you take 9 other interns and they all go the opposite way, and then they go look into doing something else and are no longer in strength and conditioning. And instead, you take the energy and you continue to push forward, and fast forward years down the line, you've created this book that's a #1 seller. What were some of the things that you did in between that internship and where you are now that have helped you get to the point where you have developed enough to put into a top-selling book?
I had to listen. I mean, sincerely, I tried to listen to feedback and seek out feedback as often as possible. And not just, hey, what do you think after a really good session? Because when we ask someone, what do we think after we know we killed it? Everyone knows that we're fishing with candy. We're looking for positive reinforcement. We want someone to fluff up what we just did. No, for me, it was constantly looking for feedback, good, bad, and indifferent from athletes, from other coaches. And it wasn't in an overbearing way, like all day long, but where I saw a strategic, organic opportunity to get some feedback, to learn, I took that bull by the horns all the way. And so that was key. For me, just generally speaking, I'm an overthinker, but I think with every weakness, hiding inside of it is a strength. And so as someone that does a lot of introspection as it is, I've learned over the years to harness that as a self-reflective piece. And so I like to consider myself very reflective, whether it's a meeting with a colleague, a team, an athlete, it doesn't matter what it is. I always go through these self-debriefs, and I ask myself, how can I get 1% better when I'm in that next situation? How can I just get 1% better? And over time, if you just keep putting one foot in front of the other and reflecting how that last step felt, so you can make the next step a little bit better, pretty soon you like where you're walking and you like the shoes you're walking in. And that's always been my attitude about progress. When people say, what's your advice? I'm like, well, just do it. Like, what do you mean? Like, too many people stop. They feel like people owe them something. They feel like the world owes them something. And the reality is, once you realize that no one owes you anything, and what you're going to get is a reflection of what you put in, it liberates you in life, I find. And so for me, each step of the way, I was trying to invest in myself. And in the spirit of, Jocko's book, Extreme Ownership, live that way. Even when you know the odds were stacked against you, even when you know everything was out of your control, as just a mental frame, if you attack it as, well, what could I have done to be better? How could I have made the situation better? Even if it's completely in your attitude, your response, the net outcome there is going to be far, far more positive than any negativity or self-reflection that says, well, it wasn't my fault. I can't learn anything from that moment. In terms of pinnacle moments, like concrete pinnacle moments moving forward, I was a passionate, and I am a passionate guy, and I've been unapologetic about my passion, and sometimes probably to a fault. And so I made it very apparent to the guys at Athletes Performance at the time that one day I wanted to run the NFL Combine program. And they told me, okay, to cut your teeth, that means you're going to run the regeneration. I said, okay. And guys, to understand what running the regeneration for the Athletes Performance Combine program meant, it meant I was in a dark room running foam roll sessions 3 times in the morning, 3 times in the afternoon, and then walking those guys out to the hot tub and the cold plunge and timing their reps and coming up with jokes and riddles to keep them interested so they didn't get out too early. I did that for 2.5 years. I didn't even see a given repetition, but I was willing to do that. I was eager to do that because that was me putting in the time. And so inevitably, once I got out and saw the program, it was within a year that I was tapped on the shoulder to run it. And so I think as much as we talk about knowledge, as much as we talk about accumulating information, which I believe is important, there is this invisible quality that I think all great individuals independent of field have. And that is this humility to do what it takes, this hunger to go through the dark times, whether it's an athlete playing a sport or it's me sitting in a dark room doing foam roll to try to get everyone to calm down and get their tissue feeling better. It's just willing to do what needs to be done to get where you want to go. Because if you're not willing to do that, you have to question how bad you really want it. I know I'm being unspecific, and I'm even sounding like Tony Robbins to myself right now, but the questions you're asking me are just bringing me back to the experiences of, I can't tell you about any one moment, but it's how I approached every moment.
Yeah, and I mean, just hearing you talk gets me jacked up. So I think one thing that has been, a theme of what you're talking about is introspection to improve myself so my service to others gets better. And I think that underlying theme is so important that, like, I'm not here to be the best strength coach. We're here to help as many athletes as we can. And when the focus turns out, it's way easier to be self-critical inward so that we can be honest with ourselves and start improving what we really need to. And I bet you learned a ton just spending those 2 years with the guys, communicating to all the guys that you're about to start training. And that had to be invaluable to be able to have, nobody wants to roll out or get in a hot tub. So having to help guys through that must have been so impactful for your ability to communicate when it was your turn.
No, 100%. And one of my other mentors at Exos, Craig Friedman, said, always value when you're the number 2. Because when you're the number 2, you're the one in the trenches. You're the one who is dealing with the athlete. You're the one that has a little bit of that headspace because you don't have the responsibility of running the program, of thinking about the 1,000-foot view, which means you can get very good at the 1-foot view. And so to your point, exactly, I got to build those relationships and learn how to build those relationships in a safe space, in an organic space. And when my mind had to shift back to the 1,000-foot view and had to shift back to controlling the overall program, I had built the habits around that local one-on-one communication that would have served me to be the global coach, but still create the connection at the local level, which we all know is the greatest challenge for any coach that works with groups of players.
Oh, yeah, that's so excellent. So you've been able to take communication and turn it into a science, right? Which is something that a lot of people don't think about it like that. I would love to know kind of the process of, the conversations you were having or the thoughts that you were having where you knew that there was a next level to this, where it was just not good, bad, work on this, where it really became, a process and more of a science than it was just a conversation between two people.
Yeah. It goes back very young for me. My mom always used to joke, I talk too much. And so she's like, you're going to do something with your voice one way. Hopefully it's something positive for society. And so I guess rightly or wrongly, I've always had some level of interest in language and communication. We go back to that guy, JC, who I worked with in college. He was the one that first opened my eyes to the power of effective communication when it came to teaching movement. Prior to him, all of my coaches simply were what I might call descriptive coaches. They would just describe what they need from you. Get down, bend this, squat there, put your elbow there. They just described. And you could argue, well, is that coaching? Are they putting a picture in your mind? Are they making it easier? Is it the fact that I'm not understanding or struggling to understand, or are you struggling to teach? And so my experience to them is the onus of learning was on the athlete. that if the coach didn't make sense, that was your fault for not understanding. It wasn't the coach's fault. And by no means am I saying all coaches are that way, but many of the coaches I had worked with probably fell more into that category, that old school approach than not. But then I meet this guy, JC. He's a personal trainer. You know, he's not speaking on perform better. He's just doing his thing and loving his thing. And he would love the coffee and cutoffs, by the way. That was his jive. That was his scene. And as I said, he would just communicate and cue with such precision. Like it's as if every single word mattered to this guy. And it was both in what he said and how he said it, that his clients were, it was just like gravitational pull, and the client was orbiting around his every word, and they were just stuck in. So he was getting immense focus, but what he was asking them to focus on, they'd get done with a rep and they'd be like, I've never felt it that way before. And we're talking bodybuilders here. So there's only so many movements these individuals are doing, but it's almost like he could reinvent the movement every time by deepening and deepening the way they thought and focused on it. He was like the Yoda of cueing. He coached within the movement. He didn't have to have a bunch of variation. And so I'll never forget the day. It wasn't long before, or possibly shortly after, Guido pulling the pamphlet out and showing me athletes' performance. I run into his office and I'm like, listen, man, I don't know how to describe this, but something JC is doing there out on the floor is game changing. Like, he's using the same kind of programming as everybody else. The difference is how this guy is coaching it. And I'm like, one day I got to write the book called The Form Within. So I'm 19, 20 years old saying this in an office at Oregon State University. And then you fast forward, you talk about the pinnacle moments. The next time it really hit me was in 2009. So 2009 was the year I got tapped on the shoulder to take over the NFL Combine Development Program. And early on, I was meant to co-coach it with my colleague, Joe Gomes, who is just, he's the speed whisperer. I mean, this guy is unbelievable at coaching speed, but within, I don't know, it was like 2 or 3 weeks of the program kicking off, he got called into another project. So now my first year running the Combine Speed Program, 30 of the top picks in the country, I'm now running solo. And I made a lot of mistakes, but you better believe I coached that program to the dotted I and the cross T. I sweat every detail, and I made sure the athletes did as well. And what dawned on me, it was the end of January, and it was a Monday morning acceleration session. We were on the track, and I was coaching. And I was coaching before, during, after every rep. And it hit me. I'm like, all my output is going to these players, but I'm not seeing anything in the way they're moving that suggests any of it is hitting the mark. I'm talking about getting tall. I'm talking about pushing hard off the ground, but nothing's changing in front of me. And I knew there was a lot of thoughts going through my head at the time. Like, it could be the amount I'm saying. It could be when I'm saying it. But I knew that I was completely disconnected from what I said and its possible impact on the way they move. But the thing is, at the time, if anyone had been watching that session, they would be like, dang, that dude is coaching the heck out of that. Mm-hmm. His words are on point, surgical precision with his cues. But I was only happy with what I was saying. I wasn't happy with what I was seeing. And I realized that in my mind, I was in the program, but I needed to be in the person. I could not be satisfied with just saying something. I had to be satisfied if what I said made a difference, and they owned that difference. And so I'm in the middle of running this program. Now, you and I both know you can't just abandon ship, but I logged this thing, and it was sitting there dominating my mind the entire time. And I'm going back to JC. I'm thinking back to all my conversations, the Form Within, and I'm like, I've got to study this before I get to the 2010 Combine. So fast forward, it's still 2009. We get to Indianapolis, and I'm watching all my guys run. And I'm nervous as heck because this is a big deal. We have the statistics. We know from our program, we know what the average improvement should be. Okay, so we know if a guy comes in at this level of running this 40, at this height, there's an average improvement by position. And so my guys get up, and they run, and they jump, they do everything, and they hit the average, right? They make all the necessary improvements. So the athletes are happy, agents are happy, athlete's performance is happy, okay? But I am miserable, absolutely miserable in my mind. They're like, why? And my colleagues like, man, that was a great first year. Why are you down on yourself? I'm like, listen, I know for a fact my guys could run faster because I saw them run faster on my clocks at Exos. I know my guys can move better because I watched them time and time again move better. But something happened between them leaving Phoenix and arriving in Indianapolis. Men in Black got on the plane and erased just a little bit of that improvement that I thought we had had. And I think every coach can resonate with that. Every coach has had that athlete, whether it be us in the gym with players or a sport coach who has these breakthroughs and they think, man, locked in, fantastic. And then the player goes and does their thing and it's like the house of cards comes falling down and they revert to type. And so when I dug into that moment, it became very clear where I had failed. And I think this will resonate with people. The reality is, if you do anything physically long enough, you will get better. You run long enough, you'll get better conditioning. You lift heavy enough, you will get stronger. And so I'm like, wow, the program worked. The program worked. They put in the time, they put in the reps, and that's why they improved. That's why that guy who came in looking like Bambi on ice left looking like Bambi on ice, but Bambi on ice with a bigger engine. So he was able to cover the 40 yards faster. But I thought I had taken him from Bambi on ice, to the cousin of Usain Bolt. But all of a sudden that disappears when the lights, camera, action hits this person. And I'm like, what's the difference? I'm like, the difference is when I was the one doing the cueing, when I was the one doing the reminding, when I was the extension of their memory, an extension of their mind, they could move well. But obviously I had not tested truly their ability to own that change. And most certainly the way I was coaching had not allowed them to own the change. And it's at that point that I went on a search party mission to figure out why. And I knew my intuition back from when I was 19 gave me the first crumb, and that was communication. But specifically, communication that impacts the way people learn to move. And that got me on to Gabrielle Wolf in attentional focus, which is basically the science of how what we focus on impacts how we move. And if we think about what a cue is, a cue manipulates the focus of the athlete to manipulate how they move. And while it wasn't called the science of cueing, inside of attentional focus, I found the language of coaching.
Wow. That's a lot to unpack there. And kind of, so we're kind of in the Exos period where it's 2009, 2010, you're doing the combines. If we fast forward to 2015, that's when I first heard you speak, and you were wearing, cheetah Adidas shoes and a cheetah Adidas shirt. And I had to bring it up. And now that I'm hearing you talk, I don't think it was a coincidence you picked to wear those, because that in itself makes me remember you more than some of the others. I don't know how many speakers that, you could go to in one of those weekends, but I distinctly remember 3 people, and we've, Mark Verstegen, you, and Lee Taft. Is that something that you kind of planned on doing is an intentional way to get people to remember, your speed talk? Because it stuck with me.
Well, I'll tell you what, I dig the shoes and I dig the shirt, and I knew I was doing a presentation on speed. And, for me, it's in most of life, I'm a fairly conservative person, and I like when I'm presenting, it's a bit of an alter ego. And so I'll go for a little flair when I can. But now that I think about it, might there have been a little bit of an agenda of attention grabbing? Sure. I can tell you now with all of my social media posts, the way I do presentations, the way I design my website, it absolutely factors that in. It factors in how can I capture attention and how can I draw you in, but give you information along the way and make remembering something simple.
In your experience, you started, working with high-level athletes early on, 2009, 2010, and through those experiences, have you found it easier to work with the high-level athletes or just athletes in general versus working through with other interns and other strength coaches that you're either in charge of training. Have you found one to be easier than the other?
So is the question around interacting with, let's say, interns and staff versus athletes and
Yeah,
how
so,
they might be different?
So you know, from how you coach, in you know, being able to take what you have and give it to athletes, and that they can digest that information, and then, you know, using the same system that you have in coaching language, teaching that to other coaches. Which out of those two things would you find to be, you know, either more challenging or how are they different?
Well, you know, it's interesting. My journey started by looking at cues, right? So literally focusing 1 inch wide, 1,000,000 miles deep, the last thing we say to an athlete before they move. Like, that is what I have obsessed on, because ultimately, if we look at the communication that has the single biggest impact on immediate performance and learning, it's that last thing you say. It's the thing that the person mentally goes into battle with that's going to have the greatest consequence. And so in studying that by itself early on, you would think that it would have no impact, no bearing on the way you cultivate relationships broadly, let alone the relationships and communication you cultivate with your colleagues or interns. However, if you study language and communication long enough, even if you start in that single context of the cue, it is unavoidable that you will start to learn about the underpinning principles of communication and understanding in general. And so when we look at communication, things like cognitive load, how much I can remember, well, that gets you into attention and memory. And so when I'm talking to a colleague, do I always make an effort to either summarize what they've said to make sure that I'm hearing them correctly, or summarize what I've said at the end of a meeting to make sure out of the noise that was an hour and a half, we get our 2 or 3 takeaways? Have I improved in my ability to do that since studying cueing and communication? Most certainly I have, because I know if we don't do that, if we don't give that summary with those few major points clearly articulated, ideally in an interesting way, how many meetings have you gone into where there were outcomes that were never achieved? I don't know about you, but I've been in far too many. So as best I can, if I can be thinking about attentional demand as just one feature of communication and make sure we effectively summarize at the key stop points throughout a meeting, and most certainly at the end, and then put actions against that, for example, that's a great way to improve my communication with my colleagues. I'll give you another one. A key one in communication is this, and I got this statement from Julian Treasure, who's got 5 different TED Talks, and one of them's a top 5. And he says, to be an effective communicator, something has to be true. And that is, you must first seek to understand before you can be understood. And that is, to be understood, if we think about it, for you guys to understand me, I have to put words into your head that resonate with you, that are familiar to you. Or you have to be very good at converting my words into language, ideas, and pictures that make sense to you. But even then, you'd have to take the extra step to confirm with me, so is this what you're saying? To make sure that you understand me as I intend to be understood. And what all of that nets to is, if you want to be an effective communicator, you have to truly understand the narrative, the mind of the person you are communicating with. So as I started studying cueing and I realized the importance of imagery and analogy, it naturally got me into this space of asking better questions. So for example, if I'm teaching a sprint, I might say something to the effect of, I need you to explode off the line faster. How do you think you can achieve that? What do you think you can focus on that will help you with that? And I can tell you, when I've asked that question, and I've asked that question to many, many different athletes, do you think they all give me the same answer? Not a chance.
No way.
Not a chance. So in there, I get their language. And as long as the language they give me says, okay, their language still means the same thing as my language. At the end of the day, what is communication for? It's for transfer of meaning. The words are the train. They're not the cargo. And so I want to get your words, because if I can get your words, but still have the same Trojan horse meaning inside of them, that's a win-win for both of us. I am now understood because you understand. And so it's figuring out a way to bring your narrative, your words, your images, your pictures, your likes, your dislikes into my language when I'm communicating with you, which is why I use so many questions when I'm coaching. Another way to go about that is I might say, hey, I need you to explode off the ground as fast as you can. And I ask you now, so what do I want you to focus? You want me to push off the ground as fast as I can. You see what we did there? Instead of them using my verb explode, they use their own verb that they like better, push. Now, they're not even going to be aware that they've done this. But if you are an active, empathetic listener, you will. And so guess what? I then upgrade my cue. Exactly. On your next rep, I want you to push off the ground as fast as you can. And so now let's say I'm in a meeting with my boss and I'm explaining a new strategy that we're going to use. Hey, we're going to use this athlete management system to help us track wellness and musculoskeletal strength and power. Okay, so it's a player management system. See what he's done there? He took the word athlete, but he's replaced it with player. Now in rugby, that's a real story, because in American football we tend to call them athletes, but in rugby they don't call them athletes; they call them players. So we don't use an athlete management system; we use a player management system. So the second he said that, I mirrored his language, which upgrades understanding, puts us on the same level playing field. And now I also change my language in any documents moving forward, full stop. So we could do this. We could riff on this indefinitely. But there's some examples of how attention is a one-to-one carryover, cueing to conversation. How I use understanding and what is familiar to the individual, that's a one-to-one from cue to conversation. And so ultimately, I've started to present more on communication in general, and probably will produce books more generally on communication, but it started with the seed of a cue.
So now let's catch up to where we are now. Language of Coaching is out, extremely popular. Why was now the time to do this? Why was 2020 the year to put this book out and to share all this information that you have been putting together for, over a decade now?
It goes back to my story about Luke Richardson. You got to earn the right, CT. You got to earn the right. I wasn't about to write a book that, if I was going to write a book, I needed to be the right person to write that book. I didn't want to force my name on words just because I was trying to hype up a topic I'm interested in. No, if I was going to write a book, it needed to fill a gap, and I needed to be the right person to fill it. And so you go right back, that 19-year-old kid, and we think about the form within. Then you fast forward to 2009, has that shocking moment where finally I'd spent so much time studying the what, I finally was able to come back to the how. How do I communicate? How do I get the words off the page and into the person? From 2009, right, we're talking now, that's 11 years ago. I had to spend about 3 years reading and studying and applying that in my own practice. I inevitably got to the point that I was as passionate about applying it in my own work as I was as being a coach educator, because of all the work I'd done with the Exos mentorship. And my mom had always wanted me to be a doctor. I love learning. Learning for me, I have a tattoo on my forearm that says truth. That's the pursuit of truth to the bedrock of where it exists. And so I was like, an opportunity, not one that I sought out, but an opportunity presented itself to get a PhD. Not because I wanted to be an academic. I don't work at an institution, but because I wanted to be able to ask and answer the deepest questions, the fringe questions on this topic. And that's what a PhD allowed me to do, going through every single research paper. So now I got that PhD. I completed it in 2016. As of 2016 now, I have gone through a development period of application. I have gone through an equal development period of academic pursuit. I've spent equal hours coaching coaches on this topic as I have coaching athletes. I knew at the end of this that there was going to be a book. There was never a question. I just didn't know when. And so when an opportunity to have Roger Earl, who that name For anyone that's gotten the CSCS on the Blue Book, he was one of the co-editors there, a legend in my book. He came and saw me present at the NSCA, and he said, put together a preface. This was back in 2015, and we'll go from there. And we got the deal done in 2016, and I started to write. And for me, the writing process took a lot longer than expected. Every author will tell you that. But for those that see the book, you got to understand that every single thing on there, down to whether or not a symbol is pointed in the right direction, the smallest overlap of laces on a picture, to the dotted I and the cross T, every single element of that book was scrutinized over tenfold. And probably had they given me an extra year, I would have taken it to review and edit even more. But ultimately, I've written this book to fundamentally upgrade every single human in the movement profession, knowing that that will multiply to millions of people worldwide, so that they can start to give the movement experiences that are enriching, connecting, and actually make people better. Make people learn, not be satisfied that they're just better when they're with me, but most certainly satisfied that they're better when they're not, that they own the changes. How many people have had horrible experiences with coaches? And I would argue what you remember about a coach is not what they did. You remember how they did it, both the good and the bad. This book is about the how, and I believe it's well overdue, and it was just my responsibility to write it. Had it already been written, I would not have put my name on this book. But it hadn't been written, and I feel the responsibility to put it out in the world.
Yeah, and you know, you mentioned earning the right to be able to write this book, and you know, the amount of people that you have coming forward saying how good this book is, you know, just listing off Eric Cressy, Mike Boyle, and you could go down and down that list, and it is super impressive, and it speaks to you having the right to be able to write this book, and they mentioned in their comments that it hasn't been done yet as well. So, you know, I really look forward to you know, more coaches getting their hands on this book. You know, I can't wait to get my hands on my copy yet. I ordered it 2 weeks ago, so I'm anxiously waiting. So I can't wait to get it. You know, I'm really excited for it. And then Dan Coyle wrote the preface for you.
Yeah.
How did that happen? That's incredible.
Gosh, you know, it just, and this is the whole part of earning the right. You know, I think if you continue to work hard, situations and people will present themselves that will get you closer to saying, hey, I have earned the right. So I got a call from the Cleveland Indians, who are an amazing club, forward thinking.
We're from Cleveland.
Well, okay. So the Cleveland Indians, James Harris, who's a phenomenal guy in player development. He gave me the nod, and I came in and he said, listen, I'd like you to speak with our director of cultural development. And I'm like, okay, cool. What's his name? Daniel Coyle. And I about fell out of my chair, because obviously I had read Talent Code, and it was fantastic. So we got on a call, and Dan was there for the entire 2 days of doing the workshop. And we struck up a relationship, and it was fantastic. And so as I got farther down the road of the book, I said, listen, there's no stress, there's no drama here, but I think what you're trying to do in talent development is phenomenal. And so I'd be honored if you consider writing the forward. And without a second thought, he said yes. And so he reviewed it. He provided me advice, which absolutely has influenced the final copy that is now out today. And I'm so humbled to have a person of his credibility and just his integrity be a part of the book project. So.
Did you catch any Indians games while you're in Cleveland?
No, we were actually in Phoenix, Arizona during spring training. So.
It's a little nicer weather there.
Yeah. Geez. Let's so again, we know you've talked about being on calls all day, and we don't want to, you know, we so much appreciate you being on here. Don't want to take up all your time. But you know, what do you hope people take away ultimately from the book? Because I'm sure there are so many things, and like James has talked about, we're stoked to get our hands on it and just be able to devour it. And I know I've done that with your social media over the last couple weeks. Is just, I mean, every opportunity I have to go to my phone and look and listen to your stuff. You have so much information to share. And I'm excited because I really do think, just like you said, I mean, this is a complete game changer when it comes to coaching. What do you hope that the people who read it ultimately end up getting out of the book?
I hope that twofold. Number one, they get a powerful yet adaptable blueprint to connect better with people. Full stop. The ability to connect better with people and connect those people to their movement. Because ultimately we talk about mind body. So if I can connect with you, that's me connecting with you person as a mind. And if through that connection, I can connect you better to your body, I deepen two relationships. I deepen our relationship and I deepen your relationship with yourself. And for me, that's what the book is about. And that's what I'm hoping it does. And it does it in a way that's flexible, that can adapt to your specific style, your specific needs, and the diversity of people you interact with.
Awesome.
And I will say, guys, I know we're pressed on time. I do have to jump on to another one. So you may edit my comment out here out, but I do have someone knocking on my email door here to jump on another podcast. I do apologize.
Absolutely.
Hey, that is all good. We appreciate you for coming on.
I do want to ask real quick, Nick, before we send you, where can everybody find you? I know your social media is awesome. Your Twitter is awesome. Your Instagram is awesome. Can you just direct our listeners to those areas, and then we'll let you get going?
The big thing for me is trying to be able to support people around the book with as many free, useful resources as possible. So I'd say if you head over, subscribe at thelanguageofcoaching.com. That's number one. I'll be doing a lot of free webinars. I'm going to be running a global book club every 2 weeks, and I'll be putting notices out there. So literally there's no cost. There's no paywall on anything, thelanguageofcoaching.com. And then from my perspective, as you've noted, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, they're all at Nick Winkelman. And on Facebook, it's at Language of Coaching for the book page.
Awesome. I know I subscribed to that the other day, so I'm looking forward to all the information that we get. Nick, can't say enough. Thank you so much for coming on Cutoffs and Coffee with us. This was an awesome conversation. I hope people who hear it listen to it 3, 4, 5 times because there's so much awesome information. We beg everybody to get the book because this is so important. This is so important for what we do as coaches to ultimately be able to communicate with our athletes, because without that, we have nothing. So thank you so much for coming on. Best of luck with everything in the future. And we look forward to continuing to following you.
Yeah. Thanks for the platform to share. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Now, what I